So US Olympic boxer Shakur Stevenson loses in the Olympic final, picks up a silver rather than a gold. And in the post-fight interview, which is pretty notorious now, there are loads of memes and whatnot going around on the internet of this post-fight interview. In the post-fight interview, Shakur Stevenson broke down and started crying hysterically and uncontrollably. And this has sparked debate. I mean, I've been debating with people about this over the last day or so. And it's an interesting debate. My take on it is this. As a fighter, you should be able to control your emotions and not show outward signs of fragility, emotional instability, aka weakness, because that's what your future opponents are going to see it as a lot of the time. Boxing is a sport where it is absolutely imperative that you stay on an even keel emotionally and you don't allow yourself to go up and down on some type of roller coaster. When you look at boxing over the years, amateur boxing or professional boxing, the fighters who reach the highest heights and achieve longevity in the sport are the guys who are emotionally stable. A lot of these guys, at least within the arena of boxing, are cold emotionally, quite frankly. Now, if you want to compare Stevenson and his reaction to winning the silver medal, and look, people, you have to put it all in perspective. He already has massive interest, or he already had massive interest from all types of different boxing promoters who wanted to sign him or offering him, you know, crazy money even before he went into the Olympic final. So it's not as if losing the Olympic final has destroyed his life and ruined any chances of him signing any type of lucrative contract as a professional. No, not at all. So seeing him break down like that and in such hysterics, I thought it was over the top. I thought, if you want to talk about divas, I thought that was kind of diva-esque, what Shakur Stevenson did. And I know he's a young kid at the end of the day, and young people are obviously more emotional. They've got more hormones than us older people. But even when I was a young guy, I was never emotional like that. I remember playing football in school, you know, in inter-school football matches and stuff like that against other schools. And quite often I would see players on the losing team, whether it was our team or their team, certain players would be crying. And even back then as a teenager, I was just thinking, what the hell is wrong with you? It's just a football match. Nobody died. You didn't get diagnosed with AIDS. Your girlfriend didn't just lose a baby through miscarriage. What are you crying about? Yeah, you're passionate about the game, but put things in perspective. And at the very least, hold it down and show some emotional discipline. But, you know, it has to be said, some people are more emotional than others, and some people find it more difficult to hold down their emotions because they are naturally more emotional. I confess, I've never been a particularly emotional character. All right, so maybe it's hard for me to understand people who are more emotional. But going back to my original point, when you look at boxing, you look at the emotional fighters over the years, people like Mike Tyson, Nigel Benn, Johnny Tapia, those kind of emotional guys tend to burn out quicker than the more cold, calculated fighters who you don't see blubbing after they lose on camera. You know, if any of them do shed a tear, it's going to be behind closed doors. They're not going to show that sign of weakness to their potential opponents. So like I say, yeah, those emotional fighters tend to burn out. They tend to be easier to get to from a psychological point of view by their opponents. Their opponents are able to get to them psychologically because they're emotional. Whereas the cool, calm, calculated guys are more difficult to get to psychologically because they're more in control of their emotions. And I'll give you some examples here. Go watch Evander Holyfield when he lost in the Olympics when he was a young guy. Holyfield was disappointed, obviously. The circumstances surrounding his exit from the Olympics were pretty damn controversial. He fought a guy called Kevin Barry and lost that fight in very controversial circumstances. Holyfield was clearly disappointed, but he weren't crying. He weren't sobbing and screaming and saying, "Oh, I don't like to lose." He weren't doing none of that. Holyfield was stoic, stone-faced, as he was throughout his professional career. Holyfield was the kind of guy who, not only did he not break down and start sobbing on camera when he lost fights, you know, he showed very little emotion when he would lose a fight, Holyfield, as a pro, publicly. And not only would that be the case, but he would also show very little emotion even when he won fights. You know, some fighters are jumping around the ring all over the place doing somersaults. Holyfield would win a massive fight and his body language would be fairly nonchalant. Lennox Lewis was the same for the most part. A cold, calculated kind of guy. Ice in his veins. That's what they used to say about Lennox Lewis. Bernard Hopkins, the oldest champion of all time in boxing. Another one who's cold and calculated. You know, these guys don't get emotional. And that's the key, one of the keys in boxing to achieving the highest heights and achieving longevity in the sport, is that emotional stability, that emotional discipline. Cus D'Amato, who was the trainer of Mike Tyson, the original trainer, mentor, and adopted parent, he was very big on emotional discipline, particularly with Tyson, because he saw that Tyson was an emotional kid and he wanted to control that emotion. So he used to tell Tyson, "You shouldn't even celebrate when you win. I want to keep your emotions level." When Tyson would be jumping up and down after an amateur fight, when he knocked some guy out, D'Amato would take him to the side and reprimand him. Say, "What the hell? What are you jumping around for? You're acting as though you're surprised that you won. Maintain discipline and professionalism at all times." This is what D'Amato tried to instill in Tyson. Now, ultimately, particularly after D'Amato passed away, Tyson wasn't able to control those emotions. And as you saw, somebody who was far more emotionally stable in Holyfield was able to get the better of Tyson, not just physically in the ring, but psychologically. For example, you look at Mike Tyson when he went into the rematch with Holyfield. That was the first time he'd fought somebody as a professional who'd beaten him as a professional. Okay, that was the first rematch as a professional against somebody that had beaten him. Now, normally, Tyson was a guy who would always stare his opponents down. He made a point of looking you in the eye and trying to intimidate you. That was a big thing of Tyson all the way through his career. And he did the same thing in the first fight with Holyfield. But in the second fight with Holyfield, before the opening bell, when the referee brought them both together to give them his instructions, before the rematch, Tyson couldn't look Holyfield in the eye. And that was significant. See, if Tyson was a guy who didn't normally look his opponents in the eye, then it doesn't mean anything. But given the fact that Tyson was a guy who would always stare his opponents down, and yet he couldn't look Holyfield in the eye before the rematch, that was significant right there. Tyson was looking this way, that way, the other way, looking at his feet. He couldn't look Holyfield in the face when the referee was giving the instructions before the opening bell. You know, psychologically, he wasn't in control. He wasn't in control of his emotions. And obviously later on in that fight, you saw with the ear biting situation, the guy wasn't in control of his emotions. You have to control your emotions. Compare that to Holyfield when he fought Riddick Bowe, the guy who gave him his first beatdown. Okay. Tyson's first beatdown was obviously against Buster Douglas, but he never rematched Buster Douglas. Holyfield's first beatdown was against Riddick Bowe. In the rematch with Riddick Bowe, Holyfield wasn't afraid to look Bowe in the face. He stared Bowe dead in his eye. There was no emotion there from Holyfield. He was cold, stone-faced. He had everything under control psychologically and emotionally. And that's what you want to see in a fighter. You know, and I know a lot of these emotional fighters can be exciting, Nigel Benn and all these kind of guys, but in the long run, it's the cold, calculated type of guys who are there for the duration. Even Floyd Mayweather, you look at him in the Olympics, he was disappointed that he only got a bronze medal, but you didn't see any waterworks from Floyd Mayweather, and he was just a young kid. Just like Shakur Stevenson, a young kid, but he weren't, my God, I lost, I don't like loot. He weren't doing all that. Now, Floyd might not be emotionally stable away from boxing. I don't know. There's not that much that people know about him in his personal life. But in the arena of boxing, Floyd is cold. That's how he is. He's a cold man in the arena of boxing. He controls them emotions. He don't let things get to him. He stays cool. I'll give you another example. And now this is a person who has had a lot of ups and downs in his career, but I've always said that he's very emotionally and mentally strong. And that is Amir Khan. Go look at Amir Khan in the Olympics. When he won a silver medal, when he was 17, just like Shakur Stevenson. He lost in the Olympic final against Mario Kindelan. The post-fight interview is still available on YouTube. Go watch it. Go watch 17-year-old Khan talking to the cameras after he got that silver medal rather than the gold. He's not bawling his eyes out like a little girl. He's like, well, he's putting it all in perspective. He's like, well, I wanted gold, but, you know, it is what it is. Maybe next time, next Olympics, I'll get the gold. Khan has that mental and emotional discipline to not let things get to him. And Khan's somebody who's really needed it because his chin is so weak and he's been knocked out so many times. It's only because of his mental and emotional strength that he's been able to rebound as many times as he has. In fact, Khan is one of those kind of guys who's so, mentally and emotionally strong. And when I say strong, he don't let his emotions work against him to the point where he's, afraid to go back into the ring, etc. But because he's like that, Khan, people are saying, well, actually, he's delusional. He's not talking about fighting Conor McGregor and all these kind of people. So, Khan has emotional discipline even when he was a 17-year-old kid. There was no waterworks, just like Holyfield when he was a young guy in the Olympics. No screaming and bawling, just like Gennady Golovkin. He's another one. Cold. Golovkin lost in the Olympics too, but there was no screaming and crying and none of that business. He was stoic. And that's how he is as a pro. And in fact, I think this is one of the reasons why Eastern Europeans, although somebody pointed out to me the other day, Golovkin is actually not Eastern European. He is Asian. Kazakhstan is in Asia. Be that as it may, Asia, Eastern Europe, the reason why these regions, particularly Eastern Europe, are coming up in the world of professional boxing, and one of the reasons is because these fighters are so disciplined. These Eastern European guys, they're so damn disciplined, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Most of these guys are absolutely cold in the arena of boxing. Come what may, their face hardly changes. And that is strength right there, to control the emotions. It's like Costamado used to say to Mike Tyson. He used to tell him the story about fire and fear. That fire is your friend if you can control it. Fear, as in fire, is your friend if you can control it and channel it. If you let it control you, you're in trouble. And to me, when I see somebody like Shakur Stevenson, yes, a young kid, he's letting his emotions get the better of him. You never want to do that. And I'm sure he can mature and whatnot as he gets older. But it's always a good sign to see a young kid who is able to control his emotions, even at 17, like Khan was able to do, like Holyfield was able to do. You know, like many other Olympians who have come up second best. I mean, you know, your dad didn't just die. You won a silver medal. A lot of other amateurs never even make it to the Olympics. So I like to see that kind of discipline, emotional discipline and emotional stability early on, even from a young age. So that's something that, to me, Stevenson's going to have to work on. Yeah. Going back to D'Amato used to say that, as I say, you have to control your emotions and not let your emotions control you. There was something else he used to say, which I was going to go into, which I seem to have forgotten. Maybe I'll come back to it. What was it? D'Amato used to say, there was, oh yeah, the hero and the coward. That's another story D'Amato used to tell. And the story about the hero and the coward is basically this. The hero and coward both feel exactly the same inside. They both feel the same fear. They both feel the same anxiety. The only difference between the hero and the coward is that the hero has the discipline to control his emotions and stand and do what must be done instead of breaking down or running away. That's the only difference, is the hero has the discipline. Very important. And I'll just finish by saying this. It's like in any type of masculine environment where you've got fighters, any type of environment where you have aggressive alpha males, it is imperative that you do not show weakness in environments like that. Anybody that's been to prison will tell you rule number one in prison, well, actually rule number one in prison is don't snitch. But after don't snitch, it is don't let them see you weak. Do not ever show weakness in prison. If you do, it's over for you in that prison. Yeah, you will get ran right over and you will get taken advantage of and abused. Never let them see you weak. It's very similar in boxing. That's why, as I say, somebody like Bernard Hopkins, who learned to box in prison, incidentally, he has kept that type of philosophy with him. He don't let people see him weak. Emotionally, you just don't see Hopkins weak, even as a young pro, whatever he was, 21, 22 years old. This guy was emotionless, stoic, hardcore. And somebody like Hopkins is a guy who really had to come from the bottom. He wasn't like a Shakur Stevenson, a kid who is being touted as, you know, going to be a top professional and he has all these accolades and he's getting all these offers. No, Hopkins wasn't like that. Hopkins was somebody who just came out of prison, who had virtually no amateur background other than what he did in prison. And yet he lost, I think it was his first amateur fight, first to second professional fight. But he didn't start screaming and crying about it. And he was in a far worse position than Stevenson. He had the emotional discipline to say, you know what? I just have to suck it up and try harder. Not break down, don't like to lose, and start blubbing on camera when you've already been offered, you know, multi-million-dollar contracts and stuff like that. And you're blubbing on camera because you got a silver and not a gold. What's wrong with you? You know, again, people, maybe it's just because I've never been an emotional kind of person. And some people mistakenly say that, oh, well, if you'd worked as hard as Stevenson, if you'd put so much heart into it and so much effort into it, you'd feel the same. Well, no, I wouldn't feel the same. And, you know, people saying, well, you've obviously never tried as hard as Stevenson in anything. Well, are you saying that Golovkin and, you know, Amir Khan and Holyfield and all these other Olympians who came up short, are you saying they didn't really want it? Are you saying they didn't work hard and, you know, didn't want it just as much as Stevenson? They did. But they didn't start breaking down and sobbing like girls on camera in public because they had the emotional discipline, man, and they had put everything into perspective in their minds. You know, particularly Khan, he's somebody who always tries to see the positive in every situation that happens in his life and in his career. He always tries to see the positive, and that's a good trait. Holyfield's the same, actually. You follow Holyfield's career all the way through. even after his losses, he was always trying to look at the positive side after the losses. Oh, well, I did this wrong and I did that wrong and I can make this adjustment and the next time it's going to be like this. This was always Holyfield's mindset. Always putting a positive spin even on his failures. Whereas Shakur Stevenson, I mean, God, he just broke down like a little girl and started sobbing as if somebody just shot his mum. As if he didn't make it to the Olympic final, as if he wasn't offered, you know, great deals from all types of promoters and wasn't being courted by Floyd Mayweather to possibly sign with TMT, as if all that stuff hadn't happened. The guy was crying and sobbing as though his life was over. I think he needs to bottle that, man, control that, have some discipline, because if you don't learn emotional discipline, then future opponents who are smart enough and obviously good enough will be able to use that against you. And, you know, some people get it twisted when I say stuff like this and say, oh, well, Shakur Stevenson has beat loads of guys and, you know, he'll turn professional and he'll win a world title. Yeah, he may well do. But at the top level of boxing, the margin of error is very small. So that's why the psychological aspect is so important. Because there's very little between fighters in terms of the physical aspect. You know, the physical aspect of it is so close. It's like, who has an edge? Well, the edge has to be psychological or tactical most of the time. And that's where the less emotional fighters, the more emotionally disciplined fighters, tend to get an advantage at the top level. You know, I saw quite a few people who were upset when I was discussing this online. And, one person said, oh, they were bringing up this MMA fighter who cried or whatever. Loads of these people who might cry for whatever reason. I don't know why this MMA fighter that he brought up cried in public, but it has no relevance to the discussion. He said, oh, well, crying in public don't mean, because a guy lost, it don't mean that he's weak. Well, it obviously means that he's weaker than people who don't cry after a loss. Clearly, it obviously means he don't have control of his emotions the way they do. And just because a guy who cries after a loss can beat certain people, it don't mean that he's mentally strong necessarily. I mean, I could beat Roberto Duran right now. Does that mean I'm emotionally stronger than Roberto Duran? No. Roberto Duran's an old man. I'm much bigger, much stronger, much younger. I'm supposed to be able to beat him. It don't mean, it's no measure of me being mentally or emotionally stronger than he is. Duran was one of the most mentally and emotionally strong fighters there's ever been. So you have to compare like for like. You have to compare people of a similar skill set with a similar, ability in whatever their sport is, whether it's MMA or boxing. And then compare those guys and look at the guys who are emotionally disciplined as opposed to the guys who are more emotionally erratic, who, will cry in public and start blubbing like Shakur Stevenson because they lost a fight. It's not the end of the world, man. I mean, if you were in a situation where losing your fight meant you lose your home, lose your marriage, and lose, everything all in one go, guaranteed, then sometimes, I could understand certain guys shedding a tear in that situation and not being able to hold it down. But in Stevenson's situation, man, nah, man, come on. grow some balls, little man. I don't know. That's just how I feel about it, people. I think he's going to need some emotional discipline there. Breaking down and blubbing like that, it's no good. You need to be more like the Eastern Europeans. Steely. Like the Golovkins of the world. That steely resolve. Like Kovalev. That iron will. That's what it takes at the top level. That's what separates the men from the boys at the top. And again, it's not to say that these emotional fighters are not tough guys, but that emotion can be taken advantage of. It can be manipulated by other fighters who know what they're doing. And that's what you need to be careful of. So anyway, people, just some food for thought. My thoughts on Shakur Stevenson's infamous post-fight interview after the Olympics. I hope he goes on and does great things, but I also hope he employs some emotional discipline. Maybe from all the trolling that he's receiving after that interview, he will. Maybe that will kind of, whip him back into line and whip him back into shape and show him that you can't show weakness like that, man. Particularly, not even just from the perspective of boxing, but also, you know how social media is these days. People are going to meme you to death. You're going to get meme bombed if you do anything like that in public. That's just how it is. The internet is brutal. You'll get meme bombed. And this video is certainly not intended to try and clown Shakur Stevenson. It's just intended to maybe, not that he's going to watch my videos, but just a friendly word of advice, and just my take on boxing from a psychological point of view. Emotional discipline is so important. Anthony Joshua, actually, just to close out, Anthony Joshua is somebody who is a big Mike Tyson fan and a big fan of Customado, actually. And he, after the Charles Martin fight, I've mentioned this previously, he showed very little emotion in victory. Very little. In the post-fight interview with Kugan Cassius, which he did in the dressing room after the fight, which I'm sure you can still watch on YouTube, Kugan Cassius was perplexed. He was saying, "Joshua, are you not excited that you won?" And Joshua was like, "No, this is just the beginning of my journey. It's not the end of my journey. This is not mission complete." Joshua had everything in perspective. Most fighters, particularly British fighters, because they're so hyped by the British public, most fighters in that situation would have been ecstatic and, jumping for joy and crying tears of joy and all this type of stuff. But Joshua was like, "No, this ain't nothing special. This is just one title. Tyson Fury's got all the other belts and, Deontay Wilder. This is just the beginning. There's nothing to be jumping up and down about. I'm going to stay level." And he even talked, I think it was in that interview, he even talked about staying emotionally level regardless if you win or lose. That right there is the kind of mentality that it takes to have longevity in boxing and get to the top. Now, not every fighter that has that mentality is going to achieve great things. Obviously not, because you have to have the physical ability and the training and the boxing brain and everything to go with it. But it's certainly one very important element. And I was impressed with Anthony Joshua that he has that. Not getting excited, not getting carried away when he wins, and also not getting too dejected or down and out or emotional if and when he loses. It's very important. Keep an even keel. Yeah? Keep everything in perspective. You have emotion, channel that emotion. Yeah? Contain it, channel it, focus it. That's what you have to do. So, anyway, people, long-winded video. Shout out to anybody who made it to the end. Shout out to all the new subscribers. Yeah. It's your boy Hatman. I'm out.